We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I can dispense with my introduction of the organization because you did it so ably. But as members of this subcommittee well know, in addition to being a bedrock of our society and really the very embodiment of America's entrepreneurial spirit, small businesses constitute the backbone of the U.S. economy. Small businesses comprise 99.7% of all domestic employer firms and employ more than half of all private sector workers. Between 1989 and 2003, America's small businesses generated 93.5% of all net new jobs. Approximately 4,000 new jobs are created every day by small businesses. Why is this important to note? Because these small businesses are the very firms that are most likely to be disadvantaged by the garbled and confusing communications they receive from the federal government. Perplexing paperwork and the oppressive federal regulatory regime are overburdening America's small businesses. Unlike big corporations, which have hordes of accountants, benefits coordinators, attorneys, personnel administrators, etc. at their disposal, small businesses often are at a loss to keep up with, implement, afford, or even understand the overwhelming regulatory and paperwork demands of the federal government. While the Plain Language and Government Communications Act of 2007 would not directly address this dispiriting inequity, as it does not address federal regulations, it would go a long way in easing the federal government's demands on America's small business owners. Lacking legions of paperwork soldiers, most small business owners are left alone in their battle to understand the letters, forms, notices, and instructions they receive from the federal government. As you might guess, far too often the result is a slaughter. Forget death by 1,000 cuts, try a billion. In fiscal year 2005, the American public spent 8.4 billion hours wrestling with federal paperwork requirements and $1.1 trillion complying with federal regulations. This burden was disproportionately borne by the country's small businesses. This burden is attributable to more than the mere act of compliance, however. It is also caused by the bewildering language used in much of this paperwork. Small business owners are not dumb. They are simply not fluent in legalese or Washingtonese. The federal government's proclivity towards arcane, ambiguous, or simply incomprehensible language translates into billions of lost hours and dollars. This is money and attention that America's entrepreneurs could be putting to better use, growing their businesses, for instance, or hiring more of your constituents. It is equally important to note that the effort to force the federal government to use the plain language in its communications must not be construed as an attempt to diminish, dilute, or skirt federal requirements. Quite the contrary. The small business members of NSBA are of the opinion that clearer federal communications will ease compliance, which naturally will increase compliance. It is not the goal of most small business owners to deliberately flout or infringe their federal obligations. No matter how dizzying the mass and magnitude of the requirements are, it is simply in their best interest to comply and move on to the next task at hand. When violations do occur, more often than not, they are the result of the small business owner's inability to decipher what is being asked of them. In fact, 93% of the responses to a recent NSBA poll reported having trouble understanding a letter, form, notice, or instructions they received from the federal government. Simplicity is the key. The simpler the better. The simpler the letter, form, notice, instructions, or requirement, the easier it will be for small business owners to understand and comply. Of course, easier and increased compliance not only assists small business owners and other citizens, it is also in the best interest of the federal government. In short, plain language is a common sense approach to saving the federal government and small business owners time, effort, and money. As I previously mentioned, the Plain Language and Government Communications Act of 2007 does not extend its plain language requirements to federal regulations. Convinced that clearly written and precise federal regulations would carry the same benefits as plainly written letters, forms, notices, or instructions, the small business members of NSBA eventually would like to see federal regulations written in plain or at least plainer language as well. In fact, 97% of the respondents to the NSBA poll I mentioned previously would support legislation requiring all federal regulations to be written in easy-to-understand plain language. Despite this exclusion, NSBA supports H.R. 3548. An oppressive federal regulatory regime and mountains of mangled messages and jumbled jargon from the federal government are a plague on small businesses across the country, the very small businesses that the country relies on for job creation and economic prosperity. Thankfully, this plague has a cure that is plain to see and easy to understand. The small business members of NSBA believe that the Plain Language and Government Communications Act of 2007 is an important component of this cure and are pleased to support it.